Reach for the speed, reach for the whistle, go where the rail may run. Reach for the words, reach for the story, follow the rainbow sun. To a shining time station, where dreams can come true, waiting there for you.
At the very end of the branch line that runs over the dam is an oil field. Melvin, the Fairbanks Morris diesel, works at the oil field shunting tank cars. At the entrance to the oil field is a sign that says, "No steam engines beyond this point." They have this rule because sometimes steam engines can shoot sparks when they puff along, and they don't want to risk a major disaster. When steam engines are assigned to collect tank cars from the oil refinery, they can only go as far as Peach Creek Station, which is the last station on the line. Melvin then has to bring the trains up to Peach Creek. He hates this, and often gets them dispatched with the steam engines. One day, Christian and Larry had to double-header train the tank cars to the seaport. They were waiting for Melvin to bring their tank cars. It wasn't long before Melvin arrived, and he began taunting them. "I don't know why they just don't send only diesels here, so I won't have to leave the oil refinery to bring you steam engines to your freight cars." "Because you can't send the diesels to do everything," snapped Christian. "They are needed elsewhere instead of just here, you know. They should transfer them all here, so I want to collect tank cars for you spark-shooting dinosaurs." "I know what's wrong," laughed Larry. "I think you're just lazy. That's why you don't like bringing the tank cars to us." "I'm not lazy. If I was lazy, that oil refinery wouldn't look as good as it did." "Shut up, you smoke-belching fossil," snapped Melvin. "You can't talk about smoke," laughed Christian. "Look at your exhaust." Larry and Christian burst out laughing. Melvin was cross and quickly rolled away to collect the other section of tank cars for them. Christian and Larry made their way along the shoreline. They met Taylor and Chrissy at the seaport. They saw they didn't look happy at all. "Let me guess," said Taylor. "Melvin?" "Yes," said Larry, "Melvin." "It's like no matter what, he won't stop complaining about steam engines," added Christian. "Well, he's really going to start complaining soon," sighed Chrissy. "Why?" asked Larry. "Because we have 3 big oil tankers that's scheduled to dock here in the coming week. The oil field has a big order to fill, and a lot of us steam engines are going to be assigned to the job." "Melvin's not going to like that," Christian said. It turns out Chrissy was right. The engines were busy taking loaded tank cars to the seaport to be loaded onto the oil tankers. And Melvin was indeed kept busy. He complained to the steam engines every time he dropped off tankers at Peach Creek Station, and complained about steam engines to any diesel who would listen. And it all got on everyone's nerves. At the oil refinery, there are these special tankers carrying water with a special caboose with water cannons. This is called the firefighting train, and is not to be moved from the oil refinery for any reason. It's there in case a fire breaks out at the refinery. Ray, the row foreman of engines, is also a volunteer firefighter, so he makes it his duty to inspect the fire train at least once a week to make sure everything is working properly. Late one morning, Melvin realized he was running out of space to put the tank cars. He looked over at the fire train. He then had a thought. If I move the fire train to Peach Creek, it won't be that far, and then I'll have an extra sighting. Yes, I'll do it. He switched tracks and coupled onto the fire train, parked it in a siding at Peach Creek Station. It should be fine here. Besides, we have a good safety record. No fire will happen. A few hours later, Melvin arrived back at the oil field fuming. He had just gotten into a heated argument with both Taylor and Chrissy when he dropped off their tank cars. He was hoping he would have a rest, but his hopes for a rest were dashed when the oil refinery manager told him that he had to collect some tank cars for Christian to pick up. "I'm tired of these rotten steam engines," he said. He angrily coupled onto the tank cars. He then pulled the first cut clear of the switch so he could move forward to collect the other tankers on the other side of it. But Melvin was in such a bad temper that he wasn't paying attention. Instead of heading toward the tankers, he was heading straight for the turntable that was set the wrong way. "Stop, Melvin, stop!" shouted his driver. Realizing what was about to happen, Melvin put on his brakes. But it was too late. One of the tankers plunged into the turntable pit, causing it to puncture. "At least they didn't all derail," Melvin said. But then came a bigger problem. Fire. "Oh no," said Melvin, "I'm in trouble now." The oil field workers quickly shut down operations. "I should have never moved those firefighting cars," Melvin said. "Don't worry about your stupid decision now," snapped the driver. "We have to get out of here." Melvin tried to roll backwards when his engine cut off. "Oh no," he cried, "I can't move, I can't move." Melvin's driver quickly ran for safety. Melvin began blowing his horn, crying for help. At that moment, Christian puffed in the Peach Creek station. The station master flagged him down. "There's a fire at the oil refinery. We need you to collect the firefighting train and go there straight away." "Will do," said Christian. Without another word, he went to go collect the firefighting cars. He switched tracks back down onto him and headed into the oil refinery. He rang his bell and blew his whistle just to let everyone know that help was on the way. Melvin thought he was done for until he heard Christian's whistle. "Oh, Christian, thank goodness you're here." Christian quickly came to a stop, and the workers began using the firefighting cars to fight the fire. After 2 hours of fighting the fire, it was finally out. Bernard had brought the crane to lift out the tanker car, and Larry had brought Mr. Egan and Ray to the scene. While Mr. Egan was inspecting the damage, Ray ripped apart Melvin. "I'm angry with you not only as a road foreman of vengeance," Ray began, "but I'm also angry at you as a part-time firefighter. What were you thinking moving that firefighting train?" "I guess I wasn't," said Melvin. "I was only trying to make room." "Well, that wasn't the right decision," Ray snapped. "That firefighting train is supposed to stay there for situations like this." Ray then walked away and spoke to Christian. "Christian, you did a real good job. You sprang right into action and staged what could have been a terrible disaster." "Thank you, Ray," Christian said happily. "As a reward for your bravery, you will be repainted at the works." "Oh, thank you, Ray," Christian replied happily. "You're a real hero, Christian," Larry said. "Thank you," replied Christian. "And speaking of the works, I gotta get this fire starter here there so he can get his repairs. The accident was caused by impatience and bad temper. Others can make you angry, but Melvin shouldn't have let the argument between him, Taylor, and Chrissy cause him to lose focus. He should have also used common sense and not moved the firefighting train in the first place. You have to be careful when working around fire, because if you don't, the consequences can be..." Everyone knows that you need engines to run a railroad, but without coaches and freight cars, you really don't have a railroad at all. Coaches are used for carrying people, and freight cars are used for carrying goods. On the Southern United Railroad, the coaches are pretty much well behaved, while freight cars can be something a little different. Some do behave, but most of them like to misbehave. They sing, talk loudly, make jokes, and even try to hold the engines back on Piscataway Hill. And when engines get stuck on Piscataway Hill, it's often very hard to get started again, and it aggravates the engines to a high degree. Late one afternoon, Danielle was at South Plainsville Station talking to Taylor and Chrissy. Danielle is a 282 Mikado locomotive, and she lives at Otisville Station at the other end of the line. She was waiting for Ian to depart with his passenger train so she could head back to Otisville to pick up some freight cars to bring back to South Plainsville the next day. The three friends were discussing random topics, and then the subject of Danielle's goods train for the next day came up. "I'm supposed to take this caboose I never met before," said Danielle. "What's his name?" asked Taylor. "I think Ray said his name was Blake." "Blake?" said Taylor and Chrissy together. "Yeah," Danielle replied. "What's wrong with Blake?" "Blake is the most troublesome caboose I ever met," said Chrissy. "Chrissy's right," added Taylor. "He rallies the freight cars together to play tricks on the engines." "It shouldn't be any trouble for me," said Danielle. "You remember, I have a knack for handling freight cars." "We know that," said Chrissy, "but we still want you to be careful. Blake isn't like the rest of the cabooses and freight cars. He's very tricky." "I think I'll be fine," Danielle replied, "but thanks for the warning." Just then, Ian blew his whistle. "Come on, Danielle," said her driver. "It's time to go." "Oh, yes, you're right," said Danielle. "Bye, Taylor. Bye, Chrissy. I'll see you two tomorrow afternoon." And as soon as Ian cleared the main line, Danielle headed off to Otisville confidently. Meanwhile, at Otisville, Blake was bragging to the other freight cars about a trick he had pulled on Kevin that day. That Kevin slid so far back down the hill he didn't know what hit him. "Ooh," said the other freight cars, and then what happened? They had to call Andrew to help him up the hill, and even I made it hard for him. The freight cars began laughing until they heard a familiar whistle. Danielle began to make her way into Otisville yard. "Why'd you get so quiet when she showed up?" Blake asked. "Because," they whispered, "that's Danielle. She's one of the best engines at handling us freight cars." "She doesn't look like much," said Blake. "But she is," they said. "We recommend you don't try anything." "I'm telling you guys," Blake replied. "She's no match for me, and I'll prove it to you tomorrow." Well, the trip from Otisville to the works went without incident. Danielle had to stop at the works so Rodney could shunt some coaches into her train that had to get picked up and taken back to South Plainsville. Once everything was ready, Danielle set off. "I don't know what Taylor and Chrissy were talking about. Blake's been quiet all day," she said to herself. But that was all about to change. As they made their way along the line, Blake screwed his brakes on, causing Danielle to go slower. "What's going on back there?" she shouted. Blake didn't say anything, he just sniggered. "Blake must be playing his tricks," Danielle thought to herself. "I'll teach him." So Danielle pulled extra hard. She pulled and she pulled until there was a loud crack. Coupling between two of the freight cars had broke, and the emergency brakes quickly came on. "Oh no!" cried Danielle. "This isn't good." Danielle's driver, fireman, and the conductor went to inspect the damage. Danielle's driver then came to speak to her. "You've completely broken the coupling. We can't even recouple and continue on. We've already called for Rodney to come help switch out the damaged gondola." Danielle just sighed, and Blake just chuckled. At the sheds that evening, Mr. Regan spoke severely to her. "Danielle, I don't believe this. I thought you were a careful engine." "But sir, it wasn't my fault. It was no excuses." "You're to take a freight train back to Otisville tomorrow. And if there's any more mishaps because of you being careless, you will shunt freight cars in Otisville Yard for a whole 2 weeks. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir," sighed Danielle. Just around that same time, Chrissy was in the freight yard at South Plainsville dropping off some flat cars of pipes when she overheard Blake bragging about the incident with Danielle. "I'm supposed to go on her freight train with her tomorrow," Blake said to the other freight cars. "What trick are you going to pull this time?" they asked. "I'm going to cause another separation at Piscataway Hill," he said. "By the time those emergency brakes come on, she'll be halfway up. It'll really be funny." "This isn't good," said Chrissy. "I must warn Danielle." And she quickly left her freight cars and puffed away. When Chrissy got back to the sheds, she told Danielle everything she knew. "That Blake is getting way too big for his wheels," said Larry crossly. "He definitely is," said Danielle to Larry. "But at least now I know he's planning a trick." "But what are you going to do?" asked Taylor. Danielle stayed silent for a moment. And then she said, I know what I'm gonna do. What's your plan? Asked Chrissy. Danielle whispered it to the three engines. Oh, that's gonna be a good one, Larry laughed. You're very clever, Danielle. Thank you, Larry, she replied. So the next day, Danielle made her way toward Piscataway Hill with the long freight train. She puffed slower than usual, so Blake would think that he would have her right where he wanted her. Blake was just about to put his plan into action when Danielle quickly gunned it towards the hill before Blake could even do anything. Blake was surprised but had another trick up his sleeve. As Danielle got near the top of the hill, he slipped his brakes hard on. This did cause Danielle to stall, but she was determined to let him win. Danielle pulled as hard as ever she could. Come on, I can do this. I can do this. I can't let that Caboose win. And Blake wasn't giving up either. He refused to let his brakes off. And in situations like this, something has to give. Unfortunately for Blake, the coupling between the last boxcar and the third car snapped. Blake's brakes came off and he was rocketing down the hill out of control. Help me, I can't stop, he cried. Blake was scared out of his wits. He had never been this fast before. He was then switched onto the shoreline. Just up the line, Chrissy had just left the station with some passengers when she saw Blake approaching. What the hell? She cried. Chrissy's fireman quickly changed the switch so it was set away from Chrissy and toward the marina. No! Cried Blake. Blake ran through the switch, crashed through the barrier, down the sandy embankment, onto the marina, and crashed through one of the sheds. When Blake opened his eyes, he found he was just inches from falling in the water. You're not so tough now, are you? Chrissy laughed. Blake didn't say anything. Later on, Danielle arrived with the train and Mr. Regan. Mr. Regan then spoke severely to Blake. So I heard it was you that caused that violent separation on Danielle's train yesterday. Don't even say anything, said Mr. Regan. I know it was you. And I've also heard that you've been playing tricks on other engines too. But don't worry, I know exactly what to do with you. The mess was soon cleared, and soon operations on the shoreline went back to normal. And I honestly have to say that Blake's punishment really did suit him. And I don't think Mr. Regan could have thought of one better. He sits on an isolated piece of track by one of the shoreline stations where he could do no harm. And even though he grumbles, the seagulls never listen to him anyway.